VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. We are on the August 15th edition. About 26 days from Vikings football at home against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which on paper will be the easiest game of the season. I'm a little nervous about saying that because it usually indicates upcoming calamity, but we shall see. We do have one preseason game in the books, which was discussed last week, and now we're going to start to preview some of the implications of that game leading into the next game against the Titans on Saturday night. So what I want to review with guys and gals here on YouTube, VikesNow, is roster climbers. At the moment, we got a handful. We got 5. I'm going to talk about them in alphabetical order by last name. And to set the table, these are dudes that have seemed to change my opinion a little bit, hopefully change your opinion through training camp and preseason. There's still 2 games left of preseason, so in theory, some, all, or none of these guys could utterly flounder in the next 2 games and not even make the roster. But for now, with about 3 weeks of training camp and 1 preseason game, the following 5 guys are on a righteous path to make the Vikings 53-man roster, which will be announced 2 weeks from today. We're going to cut this thing down from 90 players to 53 in a single day, and that's league-wide, which is thousands of unemployed or practice squad-bound NFLers. It's a big deal. All the cuts are on a single day. But no further ado, let's get into some of these roster climbers. I'm going to tell you who it is and why they're climbing, and we'll start with Ty Chandler alphabetically. He is the Vikings, I think, RB3 on paper at the minute. You'll recall last week they unveiled a first but unofficial depth chart, and Kene Nwangu was listed RB2 with Alexander Madison, of course, at RB1. Then you had Ty Chandler marinating at RB3. Well, he saw the field for about half the game against the Seattle Seahawks, and he tabulated 70 yards from scrimmage. So, we'll take it. The offensive line was pretty suspect, and Chandler looked the part. Maybe not like a total RB1. He's certainly fast enough to be an RB1, but certainly, in my opinion, an RB2. And we felt the same thing about Chandler last year as well. In the preseason, he dazzled, but then he was beset by a couple things in his rookie year. The broken thumb, which put him on IR for most of the season. And then Dalvin Cook was still employed with the Vikings, so Chandler was buried. Now Dalvin Cook plays with Aaron Rodgers of the New York Jets, which paves the way for Chandler to have a somewhat meaningful role in the Vikings offense. Now, I fully expect Chandler to win RB2, which would mean if they fancy more of a committee than we've seen in the last, 16 years since Adrian Peterson was drafted, Hunt. It would be a big deal for Hunt to win RB2 because I think we should start to put to rest the idea that Alexander Madison is going to be like Adrian Peterson or Dalvin Cook. Certainly not per talent or skill set, and I don't think he's going to get quite that many carries. And we always know running backs get hurt as well, so whoever wins this RB2 job is a big deal because he would be the next man up. So I think Ty Chandler's performance in Seattle looked pretty damn good and worthy of an RB2. Now the question becomes on this hodgepodge of running backs is, do they add Kareem Hunt, who worked out for them, 4 days ago? Hunt also worked out for the Saints and the Colts. But with running backs starting to go off the board, Ezekiel Elliott went to the Patriots yesterday. Guys like Leonard Fournette and Kareem Hunt are probably going to go pretty soon to some team for depth. So I'm not overly inspired. I don't think we need Kareem Hunt on the Vikings, this version of him. Now, let's see, right after he got into the trouble and started to clear his name, he's pretty damn good for the Browns, but now I think he is exact same age as Dalvin Cook. If he signs with the Vikings, great. We'll wrap our arms around it. I don't think he's completely necessary. But the good thing about Kareem Hunt is if they do sign him, he's a pass-catching running back, which could be implemented even more so in the Vikings offense than they did last year. So the reason I bring up Hunt is he is the only guy I think that would totally thwart Chandler's chances at RB2. Because I think Kene Nwangu at RB2 on the first depth chart was just a lifetime achievement nod, and then Dwayne McBride to me in the preseason game looked inept. And I don't know if that was just his first experience with real game action and that was the deal, but hopefully McBride changes the narrative. So early roster climber per the preseason and the depth chart, I believe, is Ty Chandler, presumably in line to get RB2. Next is who everybody's talking about for good reason, Ivan Pace Jr., Ivan the Terrible. The Vikings found this guy on the undrafted free agent wire. He told the whole world, y'all done effed up because you didn't draft me. And now the Vikings are the benefactor of a guy who's pissed about, the lack of draft attention or kudos at all. Ivan Pace should have been drafted in round 4. And then when that didn't happen, it should have been round 5 and so forth. 32 general managers said no thanks. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah took the plunge the day after, the Saturday of the draft, the day after the draft. I don't remember his exact day. But this guy was an absolute machine at Cincinnati. General managers were skittish about him as a long-term off-ball linebacker because he's 2 inches too short. To which I say, who cares? If he's got a motor and he flies around, sign him. We'll see what happens. Well, now, after a so far fabulous training camp effectuating folks' prophecies, this guy's going to be the real deal. He showed up to a quasi-real NFL game at Lumen Field in Seattle, and he looked the part. He looked like an NFL linebacker, and that was important to see because there was always a slight chance that all of this training camp smoke was just that, hype and smoke. Harrison Smith predicted that, on Thursday night when Ivan Pace gets on the field, you're gonna recognize him, and indeed we did. The guy looked like he was more than capable of keeping up in the speed of the NFL. And what he has going for them is, Brian Flores is a linebacker whisperer. He coached the Pittsburgh Steelers linebackers last year. And then relatively weak depth at the Vikings linebacking room. Off-ball linebacking, that is. They employ Brian Asamoah and Jordan Hicks, who are on deck to be the starting linebackers. And that's great. But in terms of the NFL speak or the opinion of the rest of the world, Asamoah and Jordan Hicks are not a formidable combination, at least not yet. Therefore, if something happens to them injury-wise or Pace is just that damn good in general, the guy's going to get some snaps in 2023 as an undrafted free agent. So this one was an absolute no-brainer. And looking at the list, the biggest no-brainer on the list, a roster climber, is Ivan Pace. And it's, long expected. We kind of thought this in the early summer, this guy's going to be good. And bada bang, he is pretty damn good. Number 3 is somebody that I think has conducted an about-face in the last 2 weeks, and that is Jalen Reagor. Now, I do not think that Jalen Reagor is going to fly up the Vikings roster and be a WR2 or anything. That's not what he's supposed to be. Well, he is supposed to be per his draft stock, but not after 3 or 4 years in the NFL. Jalen Reagor was acquired by Kwesi Adofo-Mensah late last summer from the Philadelphia Eagles for, was it a conditional 5th rounder? And the Vikings have since hedged the bet on that trade. They got back that pick during the 2023 NFL draft. So whatever Reagor does from here on out, whether he's cut, he has a bunch of catches this year, it's all gravy. That pick has already been, making up for. They got it back for next year. But Reagor has looked good at training camp, and then in the preseason game, he led the Vikings in receiving yards and receptions. And I, admittedly so, was pretty low about his chances of making the 53-man roster on August 29th, but I'm changing my tune. I think because Kwesi Adofo-Mensah personally traded for this guy, he's shown up after getting a full offseason under his belt. He's got the first-round draft stock. All he needs to be for these Vikings is a WR5. I think he has an honest-to-goodness chance to make the roster, and then we shall see how he's utilized in 2023. His competition is Brandon Powell, who also looks good. It's really a coin flip as to who gets that final wide receiver spot. Maybe they'll keep 6 and make it easy on our projections. But right now, if I had to publish a roster projection, I previously have Brandon Powell in there, and I'm starting to lean back towards Reagor because there's just that upside that's too irresistible, even though, he pissed you off during the Colts game, caused a couple interceptions, and then his punt returning last year wasn't any good either. But I think there's something to be said for continuity in an offense for a second year and a full offseason. So I believe Reagor, who was once firmly on a roster bubble, heading towards, a cut candidate, I think he has resurged to probably making the 53-man roster. We shall see. Let me know what you think on Reagor. The next 2 are defensive players. Number 4, Najee Thompson. He was the special teams god for a night in Seattle. But he I think he nabbed a couple punt returners and then downed a kick. He basically put a clinic on film on how to make a football team as a special teamers. And with men like Chris Boyd departed to the Cardinals and Dan Chisena not working here anymore, you kind of need those special teamers to do the thing. Now, this one is really tricky because, you're talking about roster spots and how they're accounted for. I don't know how Najee Thompson makes the depth chart as a cornerback because you have Byron Murphy, Caleb Evans, Andrew Booth, Mekhi Blackman, Jawan Williams, and then right at that cutoff, they would probably keep those guys, and then that's about it. Now, in theory, they could keep Najee in addition, kind of like, Rager and Powell both keeping them both. But then when you start to keep more than one extra guy at each position, then you're at, a 54 or 55-man roster, and that's not going to do it. But I think if the Vikings are eyeing somebody in a special teams role, I know Najee Thompson, beyond the shadow of a doubt, proved in Seattle that he can be that guy. Now, I'll caveat all of these things. There's a lot of times you see shit in the preseason, they're like, whoa, that was like T.Y. McGill last year. Remember how good he looked in the preseason? Dude was cut. There's a lot of times in preseason games where guys will score or do something marvelous, and we're like, ooh, he's going to make the team. And then you turn around 5 days later, he's cut and signs with the 49ers like T.Y. McGill. So it's almost like Nick Muse with that sweet touchdown catch. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, he looks like he can make a 53-man roster. But there are many circumstances, especially for the Vikings in the preseason, where a single play or two doesn't really translate to success. There was a wide receiver. Oh, my goodness, I'm going to blank on there. Who was it? I'm going to have to look it up. 3 years ago in the preseason, who caught 2 touchdowns and then was cut. God, who was it? Was it Albert Wilson? I think it was Albert Wilson, a free agent dude. He caught 2 touchdowns in a preseason game. I was like, this team has terrible WR depth at WR4, WR5. Boom, was cut. Was that last year? I think that was last year, now that I talk it through on air. But Najee Thompson, he also tweeted, and I think deleted, that he's the best special teams player in the country. So he's got that dog in him. He knows that he can do the thing on special teams. So hopefully they find a way to keep him in 53-man trim down. And then finally, who I would consider, if there was such a thing as a single game MVP for a preseason game, is Luigi Villain. Boom. That guy was fantastic on Thursday night, and he is in an edge rusher room that kept 5 edge rushers going into the 2022 season. Now, that was Ed Donatell's defense, so we might see some switches for counts per position. But Luigi Villain had, 3 tackles, 3 quarterback hits, and a sack against the Seahawks backup players. And this is the dude who made the roster last year as an undrafted free agent. He kind of had a junior version of the Ivan Pace hype this year. He didn't live up to it like Ivan has. But Luigi Villain very much, I think, has an inside track to make this roster because this leadership regime likes him. But the only thing you have to wonder is he the odd man out? It's tricky because you have Daniil. They're probably going to keep 5. Again, maybe they'll keep 6 and all of this is moot. But 5 edge rushers, Daniil Hunter, obvious. Marcus Davenport, obvious. And then it is Patrick Jones, probably, even though he's not a crazy draft pick. DJ Wanham in the final year of his contract, that's 4. And then it's Luigi Villain or Andre Carter. That's where you'd have to keep 6 if you want Hunter, Davenport, Jones, Wanham, Carter II, and Villain. That's 6 edge rushers. And last year they only kept 5. So perhaps they let Carter II hit the practice squad, which is a little risky because a team can snag him. But Luigi Villain played too well in the preseason game and has looked pretty good in the training camp as well to not keep him on the roster. And he's so damn young. This is only his second year. So I do think Villain finds a way to make the roster, although I hope that Carter II isn't the odd man out, which leads me to my hypothesis that I've had for about 2 months is that DJ Wanham will be cut because he's not a crazy draft pick. So you heard it here first, at least as a theory. So let me recap those from 1 to 5. Ty Chandler, roster climber. Ivan Pace Jr., for sure, a roster climber. Jalen Reagor kind of having a reclamation offseason, I would say. Najee Thompson, special teams god for a day. And then Luigi Villain, who I hope makes the 53-man roster. We'll be back with Josh Fry tomorrow to talk about this upcoming Titans preseason game. And henceforth, Skol, baby.